Hey guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. This is going to be a Western Wednesday comic review. I mean, it has a slightly manga influenced style, but it is a Western comic published by Zondervan. So, if you haven't seen my previous reviews, we are looking at Tomo Volume 7, a Christian, slightly manga influenced American comic created by Tom Bancroft of Disney fame and Rob Corley. Series editor Bud Rogers, story by Jim Kruger, art by Aria Padilla. Now, the art in this volume is not nearly as good as previous volumes. I noticed that while I was reading, and sure enough, there are two extra artists brought onto this project, Noel Rodriguez and Dan Borjoños. That is almost always a sign that it was rushed for publication when they bring on additional artists. So the strength of Ariel Padilla's art style is sometimes she draws in a little bit of a loose style or maybe a little cartoony on some of the faces, but she has a really solid construction to her characters, and she adds a lot of detail and vibrancy to the world and the fantasy elements and the fantasy armor. And I just feel like Volume 7, in many places, the art is just bad. And it's a shame because I was really strongly impressed by the art of Volumes 1 through 6. Also in Volume 6, I've been talking about this as a Christian comic. And I was also impressed by the subtlety of it, where I was comparing it to the Chronicles of Narnia, in that I thought that the Christian worldview was woven into a story very subtly, in a way where if you knew what you were looking for, it was very obvious, but it didn't distract you from the story. And then when I read Volume 6, there was kind of a very, very obvious, I would say, a bit ham-fisted Christian conversion sequence for Hannah. And my argument was I felt like it wasn't woven into the rest of the story. We were doing our cool little fantasy story. We took a break. We made sure that Hannah converted to Christ. And now it's back to the cool fantasy story. Now that we're getting back into the fantasy elements, we're kind of getting back into the part of the story that I'm really resonating with. But I feel like some of those weaknesses are being carried on to Volume 7. So I'm a little conflicted because overall, I'm still impressed by the quality of this series, especially Volumes 2 through 5. Volume 7, like the art, with kind of like the bad art, the poor quality art, and some of the maybe more annoying preachy moments in it, I feel like this is a pretty poor volume compared to some of the previous ones. But I would still say the previous volumes are so strong, I would still recommend this series despite those qualifications. So with that in mind, let's talk about Volume 7. And despite what I've just said, I actually think some of the story beats in Volume 7 are quite good. So let's dive into it. So in previous volumes, we've seen that King Ardath, who has, because of the magical curse on the kingdom, has transformed into sort of a minotaur-like creature. He has doubts that Ernado, the sorcerer, is perhaps not loyal to him, and he's so conflicted he doesn't know who to trust anymore. So he releases his captain Surgar from prison and says, "You're going to be hunted as a fugitive, but I want you to investigate Ernado and tell me if you think that he's really a true and loyal, what would the word be, advisor to me." So Surgar does some investigation and he discovers the ancient prophecy, which identifies Ernado as a demon and identifies Hannah as the girl who will defeat Ernado. So that gives him, hopefully, what he thinks might be confirmation that, or proof that will convince King Ardath to turn against Ernado. Meanwhile, Hannah and Tomo do some investigating undercover, and she finally meets her father. She's met him before. He wasn't willing to tell her he was her father originally. Her grandfather Zhou insists that you have to tell her, and so we get a heartwarming reunion. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Pastor James and her friend Brittany are basically praying for Hannah, and they're discussing how she's, in this terrible situation where she basically has to fight a war. And this maybe illustrates one problem where I've really liked Pastor James' character in that He's just a stable, good dad who gives good advice. And I kind of appreciate that because we're kind of starved of good dad characters. But this kind of illustrates the problem where while Hannah's having this magical, fantastical adventure, they're basically stuck at home on Earth praying for her. And they don't really get to have much involvement in the story itself, except for maybe like commenting on what Hannah is up to right now. Hannah meets Surgar, and the last time she met him, she was an enemy, so she attacks, and there's some foreshadowing here. How's this for loving your enemy, Grandfather Joe? I love to beat them up. So this is foreshadowing for a plot point later. Let me comment on this now. I feel like some of the Christian allegory and Christian messaging was sort of like it was added in the dialogue, and it isn't inherent in the plot. So Hannah, her character is initially I thought she was just sort of like a sweet little girl, and then she they really developed her nicely. She has some kind of like charmy spunk to her. She's got a little bit of a mischievous, teenage rebellious side to her. She makes dumb mistakes, so she's definitely not a Mary Sue, but she doesn't have what I'd call a significant. She doesn't have like a fatal flaw. She doesn't have like a single problem for her that's like causing her to fail morally. Her mistakes are sort of like little mistakes, like, being clumsy or not being quite up to like, fighting this guy or that guy, or, kind of, they're not moral mistakes. They're sort of like, they're more errors than character flaws. And it hasn't really been set up that Hannah is a person who has a problem hating her enemies. And I feel like that this should have been set up kind of like throughout this. We should have seen instances of Hannah showing hatred towards people who are her enemies, so that we know that this is a recurring problem for her, because this is going to become a central plot point later, the hatred of one's enemy versus the Christian concept of loving your enemy. So Surgar discovers that he's been betrayed by one of Ernado's spies, and they attack him. And he gives a really epic speech to King Ardath saying, Ernado has poisoned you. I have always remained loyal to who you were, King Ardath. And it's fantastic. I especially love how King Ardath's character is handled, because he wants to be a good king, but he's being misled by a wicked, sort of satanic or Luciferian advisor, and that's corrupting his mind. So he's a very tragic character. Earlier, Hannah sort of jokingly told some of the animals about what heaven is, and then as these two discuss it, it's sort of like the very idea of heaven inspires them, that they're tired of life under Ernado. They kind of are aware that they're being turned into animals under Ernado's false leadership. And so I like that. I really like how it's handled here, where the Christianity is sort of subtly tying into the magical and fantastical story. She tells them about heaven. They hear the idea about heaven. That's kind of like a reminder to them that there's something greater than this evil monster that we're serving right now. I kind of wish it was all handled that as nicely as it is in this scene. Flashing forward, spoiler. Hannah's father appears to be killed in battle. At the very least, he's stabbed and seemingly left for dead. And she reacts in a ferocious rage, and she makes a mistake. So King Ardath wants to assemble all of the pieces of magical armor. He has absolutely everything except the sword. So Hannah loses her temper. She charges at King Ardath. She has the sword, which means she's bringing the final piece of the puzzle closer to King Ardath. This is another thing where it's a good idea, but I think it should have been foreshadowed, or we should have been like told that this was going to be a big deal. Like there should have been like a strategy session where they said, okay, Hannah, you have the sword of the spirit. It's super duper powerful, but if you bring it to King Ardath, then he's going to assemble the full armor and he'll have supreme power. So whatever you do, don't go to King Ardath. We will handle King Ardath. You take out all the mooks with the sword of the spirit. And then she loses her temper and she disobeys that order. Instead, she loses her temper kind of like as she's yelling and losing her temper, they're yelling at her to stop. And sort of like the the plot exposition is happening here in the dialogue, when it should have been basically sort of, you have to explain it like a stupid kid needs to understand it. You need to have a scene where they tell you, do not do that stupid thing, so that then when the character does the stupid thing, we all say, oh no, they're doing the stupid thing, oh no, oh no. So, and again, this is Hannah forgetting to love her enemies, being filled with hatred, going to kill Ardath in a rage. Tomo still loves his brother, and he wants to redeem his brother, and he doesn't want to see his brother die. He doesn't want to see Hannah kill him. So Tomo intervenes and puts himself between Hannah and Ardath. And now Hannah has to grapple with the fear that she killed her friend Tomo. Ouch. So from a plot or storytelling perspective, this is really hard-hitting stuff. They are putting Hannah through like the depths of darkness and the dark night of the soul right here. After this, they carry Tomo off, seemingly dead, and Hannah kind of has like a confrontation with God, where this is such a poorly drawn page. It's a horribly drawn page. But she sort of has a confrontation with God, where she's not sure if she can believe in him at this dark moment where she feels like she's failed him. She feels like a piece of crap. She doesn't know why would God allow this to happen to me. And then Surgar arrives and tells her that this fight isn't over. You can still do this. The prophecy said you're going to beat that guy. I'm going to take you to that guy, and you're going to fix this. So, what to say about this series? I guess the sad thing is overall I really love this series. I thought this is like a modern C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia kind of story I just stumbled across here. And I've now had like 2 volumes in a row where I'm not happy with it. I wasn't really happy with how the Christian I'm not saying you can't have a Christian conversion scene in a Christian manga. I wasn't happy with how it was handled and fit into the narrative in volume 7. I'm not happy with the art of this, but maybe that was just like a production thing. And I feel like some of the Christian messaging was tacked on rather than woven into volume 7. So we've still got volume 8. We've still got the climax to get through, and a good climax can save a series in my opinion if you end on a high note. 6 and 7, but if that's true, then 6 and 7 are definitely the weakest point of this series. I would still say overall that throughout the series, there's been like great humor, there's been great action, there's been great consideration to not making Hannah a Mary Sue and making her struggle and fight. And in this volume, we see Hannah fail significantly at a fundamental level. They go have their final battle, and Hannah is the reason the entire final battle fails and everything is screwed up. So that is good character writing, because now she has to make up for her mistake. So volume 8 is coming. I will let you know what I think of the series overall once I get to volume 8. Until then, I'm reserving final judgment on Tomo. So, and please do not rush your artists. Ariel Padilla is a very talented artist. I love her construction. I love her fantasy details. Give them time to really tighten up and polish the art on these products. Because one of the things I said earlier is I feel like Zondervan is sitting on a really, really nice series here. I'd almost like to see it printed in like a nice color edition. But that's that. We're gonna reserve our judgment until we read volume 8. I'm no more Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Catch you later.